We'll just give it a couple of minutes. And while we wait for everybody else, in the chat box, just say, do you ever speak to yourself? You ever have a conversation with yourself? Dindie se klonk werk nie. Dindie, maar ja, it's weird, want die ander mense kan my hoor. En miskien het jou speakers adjust. Seems like everybody can hear me except Dindie. Okay. Lisa, your speaker is nie gemute nie, maar jy kan my hoor. All the time. Okay, so Estie speaks to herself all the time. Chantel speaks to herself all the time. All right. Now, as the other guys are struggling with sound, carry on. We're recording in any case, so for those guys that can't make it, I'll just edit the recording as usual and keep it short. So for those of you who speak to yourself, it's not strange. Okay, 96% of this population on Earth, we speak to ourselves. But if you're a human being, I am sure that your communication with yourself is important, because on some other level, you are communicating with yourself all the time, in any case, because your senses give you input around the world what's happening, and your brain has to make sense of the senses that's sending the input. And in that, in your internal world, you are communicating with yourself basically all the time. Now people say, okay, I need to talk to myself. So I see Lisa says she's also answers herself. So that's good. If you have a conversation with yourself and you ask questions and you can answer yourself, that's actually brilliant. If the answers are good and if they are empowering and not disempowering. Okay, and tonight's topic came about because a lot of my clients that I've been seeing, it's funny to notice the self-talk, especially when there's huge trauma, when there's huge stress factors. There's a certain voice and certain speech pattern that comes out the whole time, and they fall back to that speech pattern, and that becomes the internal voice. So if you talk to yourself all the time, it's a good question to ask yourself, how old is that voice that you're hearing in your head that speaks to you? Does it sound like an adult? Does it sound like a teenager? Is it younger? Now, this might change in circumstances, okay? So when you talk to yourself, that little voice, that self-talk, that communication with yourself on the auditory spectrum, so when you speak to yourself, that voice might change. And it's a funny question to ask, because if you know what that voice is, if it's older or younger, or more or less the same voice as you have now, and then you can start to fathom out, where did you learn your self-talk and who did you learn it from? For instance, if there are certain speech patterns that you recognize in yourself and an authority figure or a parent, or the same stuff that you say, especially when it comes to berating yourself or judging yourself or reprimanding yourself, those voices and that internal voice is usually the authority figure that's taught you in the past how to speak to yourself. And it's not usually conducive to growth, that voice especially, because if you have that voice speaking to you, it can be derogatory, it can be judgmental, it can be hurtful. You fall into a pattern of self-talk that's hurting you and that makes you feel not nice about yourself. Okay, and usually most of the time, the internal voice is an accusatory voice. That means it accuses you of something. Okay, and I don't know if you can relate to that, but usually you don't talk to yourself in a nice way. It is, oh, what have I done now? Oh, why am I in this position again? Oh, shucks, I should just do this, and I must do this, and you are just not worth it, and this is pain, and the list goes on, and that voice accuses you. Now, what do we do about an accusatory voice on inside of our heads? If you have self-talk that's accusatory and that's destructive, again, you start off by going, okay, how old is this voice? Who taught me about this voice? What is this voice, male or female? Okay, and then you start questioning your inner voice. So you have a conversation with yourself and you start questioning yourself and you start questioning the voice. Because isn't it phenomenal that when you are speaking to yourself, somebody's listening? How weird is that? So you are you are giving the message and you are receiving the message at the same time, because your internal voice, you're talking, and your processes are processing it. So there's a part of you that's listening and there's a part of you that's communicating. That is quite a weird thing to think about. If you sit on this planet and you talk to yourself, you are the messenger and the receiver of the message. So if that's the case, what the messenger is saying, the tone of voice they are using, okay, the type of words that they are using, are those words nice, peaceful? Is it like you would talk to someone you love? Is it like you would talk to someone that you respect? Is that voice the same? Most of the time it is not, because when we come to our own internal voice, we judge a lot. And yeah, we judge ourselves more harshly than other people will ever do. Because other people don't usually think of us in that way and think of us in all the time. So we've got this idea of talking to ourselves, but when we speak to other people, we don't speak the same way. Okay. So if you have a question in your mind, running, and you answer it yourself, there's a very good thing to gauge if this question that you're answering and if the self-talk that you're using is nice for you and if it's empowering. And the only way you can feel that and sense that is in the body, right? There's no other place you can sense that. So if that voice is driving you nuts in the background and you've got questions and you're accusing yourself and you take a step back and you receive the message, the part of you that receives the message, how is that part feeling? What is that part doing? How would it like to react to that voice? That's important to note, because just as in any normal conversation, you would sit and you would feel what people say. Just this week, one little kid was told at school his mother shouldn't have had him. It's one of the kids I teach. And those words hurt more than physical abuse, because in his mind, that other kid spoke to him in that way. Now he's going to speak to himself in that way, because then when he's bad, he said, I shouldn't have been born, my mother shouldn't have had me. And the kids perpetuate what they hear. Now, if we are young and we perpetuate what we hear and we never question it, what happens to us when we grow older? We still perpetuate the same patterns. And those patterns are the ones that we should learn how to break. But you must be aware of them first. I've seen so many people, and myself included, I catch myself every now and again saying negative patterns and they just pop out and I go, okay, but wait, who's doing the talking here? Who's the messenger? Is this the message I would like to give to myself or somebody that I respect or somebody that I love? Then that starts to become a negotiation. You don't just perpetuate the patterns that you've learned when you were younger. And that is crucial for you to actually have nice self-talk with you. Now, sometimes it's weird because your self-talk voice might be male or female, older or younger. So when you've established what type of voice that is, then you can more or less establish the authority figure that you would like to listen to. Would it be a male figure? Would it be a female figure? And then if that's the case, you change the self-talk around by doing what? By asking questions, okay? If you ask questions, it's important to ask good quality questions. Now, it was Dr. DeMartini that said, the quality of your life is based on the quality of questions that you ask, or the quality of the questions that you ask. Now, if we ask quality questions, what does that mean? We have the basic questions of the 5 W's: who, where, when, what, and why. Okay, so those questions always pop to the surface. We ask those questions. But what is a good quality question? A good quality question, especially for yourself, is to take the emotions out of the question. Because most people ask questions in an emotional state and in an equilibrated state. And when they ask questions in the 2 different states, the sense and the intent of the question is totally different. So, for instance, why is something bad always happening to me? That's a question. Why did this happen again? If you have a personal question that's directed at you personally with your self-talk, instead of asking, why did this happen, or why is this happening again, or why is this perpetuating, replace the why on a personal level with how. How am I going to not make this happen again? How can I grow from this experience? because why seems to be a very judgmental question. And I think it comes from childhood, especially in the Afrikaans language. In Afrikaans language, we use the word hoekom, 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 hoekom. And that's like why? Get bombarded with why questions when you're younger. And when you're younger, you just want to experience life, right? You want to grow, you want to experience, you want to enjoy life. You've got this innocence, and then people come, why? And half of the time, the children don't even know why. So that question becomes a very self-judgmental question directed at your own being. Okay, so instead of asking why, ask how. How is this event going to make me stronger? How am I going to get out of it? How am I going to react to it if it happens again? Not why has this happened to me? Why am I stuck here again? Why? That why seems to go into a downward spiral. Where the why works well is when you ask about nature and things. Why is that tree the color it is? Why is the sky blue? Why does an animal do this? Why are the mountains so differently shaped and formed? So the why, when you apply it to nature things, it's actually quite nice. When you apply it to personal emotional things, it doesn't seem to have the same effect. So instead of asking why, ask how. Okay. Now, in your mind, if you've got about 60,000 thoughts a day, how many of those thoughts are you aware of? Definitely not all of them. And I think I've mentioned this in the past, but when you have thought processes, they put your brain on an EEG machine, and they see that they test the activity in the brain, and they equate the activity in the brain to thoughts. Of course, the brain is a receiver and a sender of things, because we can receive messages, we can transmit them, and we can send them. So you receive and send things in your mind. Now, if you've got about 60,000 processes happening during the day in the background, where do those things get stored? Naturally, in the subconscious. It's got a subconscious effect. And that's why it's important to do subconscious work, to just equilibrate those things, because the logical mind just carries on with questioning, never receiving an answer. Okay. Another thing, if you want to have good quality questions that you ask yourself, first of all, take the emotion out. The emotion is there to be experienced, but do not ask questions in an emotional state. Because if you ask questions in an emotional state, it doesn't lead to a specific answer. Experience the emotion, then you question the emotion. It's like, okay, where is this emotion coming from? How will I deal with it? Not why am I feeling this emotion again? That's a huge judgment. You're allowed to feel the emotion. And if it's a repetitive emotion, it's also okay. But then ask yourself, where is it coming from? How am I going to deal with it? And give yourself a chance to experience that emotion fully. And then you can start to adjust your internal self-talk with good quality questions. Because while you're in the emotion and you do not question it, you can actually balance out and take a step back. Because remember, there's a messenger inside of you and there's a receiver inside of you. And that is weird. But to distinguish between the two is crucial for you to have nice self-talk, good self-talk. And if that is difficult, most people struggle with this one. You find somebody that you really love or really respect, and you imagine what that would be like if that person's sitting next to you and they hear yourself speaking to yourself the way you do. And then imagine what that would be like if you speak the way you speak to yourself to that person that you love and that you care about. There's a big difference that comes out usually. The tone of voice, the types of words you use, the patience you have. Okay, so if you want to talk to yourself in that regard, just imagine the person next to you, because the subconscious realm works in imagination and emotions and colors and sounds and tastes and feelings. It's a huge, fantastical world in the subconscious realm. Now, why not use it for positivity, and why not use it to grow? And why not use it to change the internal voices and the internal dialogue that you have? So you make it as weird and as wonderful as possible. Even the questions can be funny sometimes. Okay. There's a good exercise you can do for yourself. Write down 100 questions. Sounds simple enough, but just write down 100 questions and see if you can write down 100 different questions. And if you do this exercise, you'll find that it's very weird, because how the hell do you get to 100 questions, and where does the mind go with these questions? Some of them become very weird. Some of them become very strange. Some of them, it's like, where the hell does it come from? Like, I remember I did this exercise many years ago, and while I was writing, The one question out of the 100 that stuck in my mind is, why is Goofy Goofy? It was the Disney character. I don't know if you guys remember Goofy, but he's a dog. And my question was, why is Goofy Goofy? And I'm like, where the hell does this question come from? So if you write a lot of questions, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out there. And then you can actually sit and look at those questions, see how many of them are emotionally charged, which ones are nice and empowering, which ones are disempowering, which ones are just questions for a question's sake. And if that is the case, then the questions that you ask will lead to way better self-talk in the end. Now, during the day, you don't really have much time for this, especially if you're busy. But at night, just before you go to sleep, and in the morning, just after you've woken up, it is very good to just sit there with your internal voice and ask yourself, or imagine which questions come up, and ask yourself if those questions are empowering or not. Because that's when you start programming your subconscious mind. That's when you start putting your subconscious mind and helping it assist you, not working against it. It's those times are crucial. And usually in prayer, in meditation, in silent time, those times are also crucial. Not while you're watching TV, not while you're distracted with something else. Then those questions won't do anything. Your mind cannot handle it. It's too much stimulation. Okay. So if you pick up on a question, go towards the question, ask yourself, okay, how do I reframe this question? Reframing is a technique using different words and different phrases to reframe the same thing. Right. For instance, if you have to imagine how many different ways can you ask somebody what's on their mind? What are you thinking? What's on your mind? Any for your thoughts? Where are your thoughts going? You've got so many different questions to ask the same thing, but the reframing of the question is actually crucial. And then you can find out which questions work for you and which questions resonate for you or with you. Because remember, we only make sense through this body on this planet. We've got our senses, we've got a sixth sense. Most notably, females have a stronger sixth sense than males, just because females are more interested in people than in things. And males usually interested more in things than in people. So they miss the body language and don't pick up as much as females do. But you only have these senses to make sense of the world. So if these senses are being charged and driven by emotionally asked questions, they are going to be distorted. You will distort your reality. Okay, and you can imagine that always related back to a small child or a younger child. When a younger child bumps a toe or gets injured or drops their favorite toy or drops their favorite piece of food, the world ends. It's like chaos. They go absolutely ballistic, and those emotions, you can't ask them questions, and they can't ask questions in that emotional state. The emotion has to pass. The same with your internal realm. Let the emotion pass and then ask questions and then start your self-talk. And try different internal voices with your self-talk. Will you make it lower? Will you make it high-pitched? Will you make it slow-pitched? Now people are going to think you're nuts, but if 96% of people on this planet have an internal dialogue, why not have fun with it? Okay. And change the voices in your head. All right. Somebody sent me a meme the other day. I know the voices in my head aren't real, but they give such good advice. And I'm like, yeah, it's actually quite real, because we are communication animals. The brain has to communicate and make sense of everything around you. And if it is possible, you can start to detach yourself from that voice. And then you become the observer that so many people are talking about in meditation experiences, in prayer experiences. It's just that dissociation of you becoming the observer of your thoughts. So weird experience to have, observe your thoughts, but it happens if you practice it. And it can only start to realize for you if you start doing any type of meditation work, prayer work, breath work, stuff that actually releases you from this physical body. And I've experienced that a couple of times. And to experience your thoughts and just be the observer of your thoughts, it is a strange experience, because who's doing the observing? How can my thoughts not be me? It's very funny, but your thoughts are not you. Your thoughts are just the process that you go through. Okay, and it's a nice thing to imagine that your thoughts are like a river flowing and you are like the rock solidly standing in the river and anchored on the bottom, and your thoughts are flowing past you. It's a good way to start to dissociate from your thoughts. And then it's a good way to start to dissociate from your internal talk. And then it's a good way to start to dissociate from your questions and just observe them. Now, another question. If you have a lot of questions, if you have an internal question that goes over and over and over again, it probably means that you need to either reframe it or answer it in a way that will be conducive to growth for your subconscious realm, for your physical realm, and life around you. Because if you ask quality questions, you can grow. If you ask questions that are not of high quality and that's not empowering, you won't grow. Okay, and remember, quality questions are things that you can, with your whole forebrain, if your brain is balanced and equilibrated and not in an emotional state, you can actually ask very, very pertinent quality questions. If your brain is in an emotional state and you ask questions from that state or point of view, then it is not conducive to growth. All right. So quickly, I know that Lisa said, well, she told herself, she answers herself when she asks questions. Do you, just in the question box, type for me, can you distinguish the voice in your head that gives questions? Is it different from yours or not? Can you actually tap into the auditory sound of that voice asking the questions? Just yes or no in the questions. Answer please if you can. Just type for me if you've ever experienced it. Can you distinguish the inner voice from the outer voice? So this one that I'm speaking, if I speak and I have a thought and I go, okay, is my thought voice different than my voice that I'm speaking? So just answer that question for me if you can in the chat box, please. Can you differentiate your inner voice and your outer voice, or do they sound the same? Okay, this is a good exercise to go through. If you have to think about it, it'll be a bit weird. You may or may not be able to do this. Okay, so ST cannot distinguish. Sounds the same. Okay, good, Lisa. Right. Then D sounds the same. All right. So if that's the case, if your internal voice and your external voice sounds the same, why would you use your external voice to promote and be peaceful and say nice things to people you love, but use the internal voice to accuse you of certain things? Only one thing, judgment, self-judgment. Right. Now, if the internal voice and the external voice sounds the same, do you think your subconscious can know the difference? No. Okay, and if it cannot know the difference, what are you doing and what are you programming your subconscious with if the internal voice is accusory, judgmental, harsh? Right. So it's a bit of an eye-opener, because even if you talk to this works onto the subconscious. If you keep your mind the same and quiet and use that internal voice, it has an effect on the subconscious. All right. And a nice saying I've heard before is, imagine that every word that you speak is etched onto the sky in fire for everybody to see. That's a huge one. So imagine everything that you say is available for everybody to see, etched in the sky in fire. Then it becomes quite an interesting journey, because what are you talking about now? What are you going to say next? Are you going to swear? Are you going to judge? Are you going to degrade people? Are you going to talk badly about anybody or anything? Your mind will go, maybe not. All right, so it's a good way of practicing some restraint in what we say. And I was sitting in a restaurant the other day, a friend of mine's restaurant, and there were a lot of people talking. And this thought came to me, it's like, imagine I could hear everybody talking on this planet at the same time, and how many words are being thrown into this energetic planet we are living on. It is overwhelming. Imagine you can hear what everybody's saying all over the planet. It'll drive you nuts. Why would it drive you nuts? Because we know talking too much takes energy. Listening to people who talk too much, especially if they don't talk sense or from a place of substance, takes energy. So make sure your internal voice comes from a place of substance. It says things with energy that's empowering and not disempowering. And you can actually listen to it and energize yourself that way. Because unfortunately, thoughts and brain processes takes a lot of energy. a lot. All right. You can imagine your legs have got 2 arteries going down each leg. Your brain has 4 arteries, 2 on each side, supporting the brain. So the brain takes a lot of blood and oxygen, takes a lot of nutrients to keep this thing going. Now, what would you feed it if you feed it just simple questions, questions that are derogatory, tone of voice that's judgmental? Oh, you'll exhaust yourself. And that's usually where the problem comes in. So please just check the internal voice, check the internal dialogue, and make sure that your quality questions that you ask are quality for you and you're in control of those questions. Don't just ask questions for the sake of asking questions. All right. And finally, you can practice this. Practice this in your everyday conversations. Sit with people, look at them. One client of mine actually went into a meeting and just sat there after I've worked with her, because she would defend herself. She would try and argue with people. And one meeting she had was a bit rough, so she just sat there. She listened. And the other people freaked out because she just sat, listened very quietly, didn't respond. Yes, no, didn't overreact, didn't become emotional in the meeting, and they were flabbergasted. And she walked out of that meeting not drained. She felt quite empowered, quite refreshed, quite stable. So if you sit with people and you communicate, and especially people that are training, sit with them and look at them. I love looking at people. It's nice to stare at them, because if you can stare at them with quiet contemplation, they usually start to freak out and they'll try and fill the silence with words. But you must first learn how to fill your own, or not to fill your own silence with words. If you can just sit in a peaceful state, not letting the mind attach to ego and sensationalism, and not going into that realm of question asking and words and fantasies, you become quite equilibrated, quite poised. And that's where you want to be. That's where you want to actually start to have, or start to ask questions from. All right, so please, what if anything, for the next month or so, before we have another Wednesday wisdom session, watch the quality of your questions, watch your internal voice, and then from there, start carving out a new journey for your internal world. All righty. I hope it made sense. Our 30 minutes up. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. I'll give a couple of seconds in the chat box, or you can unmute, or you can just ask if you have any questions if something wasn't clear. It's a lot of stuff we covered, but yes, I hope that it made sense, and I hope you'll become aware of your internal realm, your internal voice, the type of questions you ask, the type of questions other people ask. It becomes a very interesting journey to see which questions are relevant to you and your internal growth, and which questions are not relevant to you and your internal growth.